Next we have Joe Barabee, Senior Microscopic Analyst for McCrone Institute. If I can get this to turn off. Thank you. All right, Joe, if you'll. I think this is you. All right. Thank you, Mr. Barabee.
Good morning. It's a real pleasure to be here, and it was a real honor to assist in this investigation. And it was an extremely interesting case that began in August of 2009, and I finally delivered my report, which was really long, at about a year later. Our main project on this, let's see here. Let me introduce my company a little bit first. We are the McCrone Group, and we are in Westmont, Illinois. And it was started by Dr. Walter C. McCrone, who's actually quite noted in the paint analysis field. He examined the Shroud of Turin in the 1970s and also the Vinland map. Those are they are still quite controversial cases. Some years later, the company was purchased by Donald Brooks and moved to Westmont, Illinois, where we still are at, and we have it's 3 different companies. I work with McCrone Associates. We also have an educational branch called the Hook College of Applied Sciences. And we also have McCrone Microscopes and Accessories, which sells instrumentation. McCrone Associates is the analytical branch of the company, and we have lots of interesting instrumentation. The core of that is what I would say the light microscope. You saw the picture of Dr. McCrone working with the light microscope, and all of the scientists have light microscopes, and it remains a very important part of what we do. The forensic inquiry that we were involved with was defined very nicely by Alec Van Hook and also by Agent Denton. We worked with. It was very structured. We had 5 known authentic pieces that were purchased by our first speaker, Mr. Whitehead. We had 5 suspected pieces, and we also had 5 works that we examined and photographed, but we did not do physical analysis on. But the original 5 of Mr. Whitehead's and the suspected ones, we did full analysis plus visual analysis on these as well. We photographed them and did some of that work. When I say visual analysis, we should be a little bit careful. I'm not an art historian. We also looked at signatures, but I'm not a forensic document examiner. So take these portions with a grain of salt. But what we did was photograph them each front and back, took close-up photographs of signatures of interest and other areas of interest. Usually the eyes I found were extremely interesting. We sampled each of the materials, roughly about 10 samples per painting, and analyzed them using some of the instrumentation that we have. And we ended up by comparing and contrasting the various kinds of data that these material that these analyses generated in an investigation of this source. Now, Clementine had a very long working creative life. So it was important, if you're going to be comparing, it's important to compare like to like. So they were the prosecutors chose very wisely in that they chose all from one time period. In the field of forensic document examination, if you're comparing writing, it all should be as close to contemporaneous as possible with one another. So all of these were centered around this period of around 1970 plus or minus 5 years. And that's important because, and that's one of the ways that they are able to show that is because her signature evolved considerably over the years. Don't forget too, she was illiterate. So when you use the word signature, you have to take that with a little bit of a grain of salt, and that actually plays in later on, we'll see. This is us working, and one of the reasons I like this picture is that it emphasizes the fact that there's no analysis of this sort that is done by one person. It's all teamwork. At McCrone Associates, one of the things that's wonderful about working in a laboratory like that is I have colleagues with whom I can collaborate on projects, and that's really important. And everybody here, you can see we're working hard and we're working as a team. Besides those 15 paintings that we originally discussed, we were also provided with an artist palette. I did not actually sample that myself, but that was actually sampled and documented by Jason Church. And we also received those many confiscated paints, and I'll talk a little bit about those later as well. Let's talk briefly about the analytical methods that we employ. As I mentioned, each of the analysts at McCrone has a polarizing light microscope, which is this instrument here, and also a stereo microscope here. In the picture of me working, of the team working here in Natchitoches, you saw a different kind of stereo microscope, but they're all working the same way. These are for lower magnifications, and we primarily use them for initial inspections and for sampling and for sample preparation. But this is a photograph of through the microscope, and it gives you a little bit of an idea of what kind of information the light microscope provides. The fact that we have all of these bright materials, bright shining things in here, tells us that these particles have more than one refractive index, and that gives us some really good information about them that correlates with the chemical information. All of the samples that I examined we looked at through the polarizing light microscope, and all of them were also examined with this instrument, a scanning electron microscope with energy dispersive X-ray spectrometry, which EDS, which is a nice, it's a big word for basically saying it provides us with elemental information. What are the elements that make up the sample? And this one, for example, has calcium and phosphorus and is a good signature for bone black. We also used Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy, or FTIR, very commonly used instrumentation, and it provides information about organic materials, which, of course, if you're doing elemental analysis, that's not going to give you much information. But this gives you a spectral signature, and this allowed us to identify, for example, that all of the paintings that we examined, both the Clementine Hunters and the questioned ones, they were all oil paintings. So So again, we were dealing with apples and apples and not a mixture of different kinds of materials. We also use Raman spectrometry, which is a complementary method to infrared spectroscopy, and also provides some very good analyses. For example, here's the L-cyanine green taken from this painting. Here's the first. This is the hospital, which was the very first painting that I examined, and I sort of fell in love with Clementine Hunter's work in examining this painting. It has this strange sort of almost a hospital in the middle of nowhere, out in space almost, it seems. But what really got me was looking at these under the microscope. There's some really fine work in the eyes, and if you're interested in comparing and contrasting the forgeries from the originals, get close up with a magnifying glass, or even better, a stereo microscope, and the difference between the toy's work and Clementine's work itself is really extraordinary. In order to create that eye, and this is a scale, a 1 millimeter scale down here, so we're talking very small. She created the eye by doing one dab of white, one dab of black, and touched it up with a little bit of red. This is extraordinary work. She's a folk artist, but the command that she had over her materials is extraordinary. Her signatures, on the other hand, are awkward at best. In the field of handwriting analysis, one of the terms that you constantly see in their reports are line quality. In other words, they're talking about the smoothness of the lines. And with writing, the whole object is to have in your brain the model of what you're doing, and so that when you create your signature, you just do it automatically. This is not written automatically. We have a form underneath in pencil, and if you look carefully, this is not, okay, there's created here. There's actually a line up here that was started, but the actual line going down here is actually a little bit lower, is drawn, not written. So there's a different mental program that was used in creating the signature. Whereas her painting is very fluid, her signatures are almost universally quite awkward. This was the first of the questioned paintings, the wedding day, that I encountered. And after having looked at 5 paintings close up for this one to be brought out, completely unscientifically, I have to say I was physically repulsed by this painting. It was an extraordinary reaction that it was spontaneous and perhaps not very scientific, but it was. I felt as if I was in the presence of something very bad, very evil. Looking at this close up, the cracks were filled with dirt. The paint itself is almost transparent. And the eyes were created with lots of jerky little movements. Let's go back for a second. Let's take a look at Clementine Hunter's work. Her paint here is all opaque. We have a very smooth background here. The impasto is well controlled. The background here is quite variegated. We'll see that. Here's another one. This is the preacher's, or Uncle Tom's eye, very transparent. The fact that the background, instead of being smooth, is full of variegation, really comes through with this highly transparent paint. This is the signature from the wedding day, and you can see it's motion, 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 motion. This is a signature. This is easily, quickly written, no hesitation. This one too. Look at the background here. Instead of it being the smooth Clementine Hunter background, this looks like it was done with a paint roller. I can't imagine any paintbrush that would create that other than a roller. The materials that we analyzed, we put into these different forms, into tables to basically compare the materials. And one of the things that was fascinating was the whites. The whites and the blacks are always the paints that you pay the most attention to, and the ground materials, because these are the artist's normal ways of working. This is harder to follow, but this to me was the essence of the report that we submitted to Attorney Van Hook and Agent Denton. And this contained the gist of the evidence that Hunter, CH, and the question Hunter, QCH, are truly different artists. And while there's some overlap in here of materials that they had in common, for example, both artists use cadmium yellow, the greatest differences in the whites, zinc white greater than titanium white, and in the case of the questioned, it was primarily titanated lithophone, which is this guy here. We found one of those in the Clementine Hunters, but not too many. One of the fascinating things from a materials usage too is we see here ultramarine blue in just about all of the question pieces and none in Clementine Hunters. Now, if you analyze art, you see ultramarine blue from when it was invented. The synthetic form, once it was invented in the early 1800s, you see it everywhere because it's a wonderful pure blue and it's relatively inexpensive. But Hunter didn't seem to use it, or at least none of the paintings that I examined had any in it at all. Also, bone black, she used bone black completely. She also used iron black, but all of the paintings in the question pieces were carbon black. They're both good materials, but very different. The other material that we see here in good supply is dolomite. And dolomite is a fill material. And let's take a look at that a little bit more. Well, here's the blue paint. And this will show, we're switching gears a little bit on blue paints. This is not about ultramarine blue anymore. But this is a cobalt violet that was in one of the Clementine paintings. And you can see that this is what I like to see. These are good professional grade materials. They're all good stuff. In Clementine, in the question piece, there is no inorganic blue material. It's almost all the titanium, barium, zinc, sulfur. It's almost all filler material and opacifier with some organic material. It's a much less expensive material. The blacks, as I mentioned, are very different. The QCHs are all basically lamp black or carbon black, whereas Clementines were the calcium and phosphorus of bone black. It became monotonous to see in all of the 5 paintings that I examined from the question, this kind of view that we saw earlier, combined with the elemental distribution of calcium and magnesium, carbon and oxygen, magnesium carbonate or dolomite, it became, you see this bright field of materials. Basically, we're dealing with very low quality student grade materials. I shouldn't say low quality, but there were definitely student grade materials much cheaper than professional quality materials that Hunter seemed to be using consistently. I'm amazed, Mr. Whitehead mentioned that she only used materials that people brought her. They were bringing her good stuff. They were really good quality materials, and she must have put in orders because the consistency of her palette is remarkable. We also looked at 231 paints that were seized by the FBI, and of those, 92 of those were Winsor Newton oil paints, and 86 of them were of the Winton, which is the student grade materials. And we did some analyses, and many of them did contain magnesium, calcium magnesium carbonate or dolomite. We looked at a lot of the visual characteristics as well. So, and compared those. This is a little, we won't go through all of this, but just awkward, poorly executed signatures, fluid, consistently well formed. What we were able to do a little bit of too, and which I think I recommended that actually they employ a forensic document examiner to really examine and analyze these signatures. I just noticed the one thing that myself was that if you look at the width to length ratios in the backward C's, you've got different proportions here. You've got 1.1 to 1.4, whereas they're almost equal, 1 to 1 in the question. So if you look at them, you see how this is, the height here and to the length is almost 1 to 1, whereas it's longer here and a little higher here. And if you look at the symmetry of these, this is all good analyzable material. We talked about the eyes. Here's an eye from one of Clementine's paintings. Here's an eye from one of the questioned. And again, when you're looking, when we step into the gallery, there's going to be a big magnifying glass on one. Take the time to look at that. And I always, being a microscopist, I always carry a magnifier with me. So if anybody wants to borrow a magnifier, tap me on the shoulder in the gallery. It really is beneficial to look at these materials and see the differences. It'll give you some good insights. In closing, the painting that really that I found the most moving, and especially in retrospect when I was able to examine these photographs that we'd made through the microscope, this is one that I did not do any chemical analysis on. This was one of the Britain images. But the amount of of emotion that she was able to pour into these two grieving angels with these, again, the scale, this is 1 millimeter scale down here. It's just amazing. With that, I thank you for your attention. Good.